The seraph's left wing snapped first, not with a sound the mortal world could hear, but in a register that made the foundations of the heavenly temple tremble 300 years before Isaiah would ever set foot in that sanctuary. Eliakim had been standing guard at the altar of incense since before the first covenant was cut with Abraham, and in all those centuries, no seraph had ever done what he was about to do. The living coal that burned perpetually on that altar was not meant for angels. It was meant for the purification of prophets, for the cleansing of lips that would speak the words of the Most High. But Eliakim had stopped listening to the words of heaven the moment he saw her kneeling in the outer court. Her name was Miriam, and she had come to the temple to die. That much the other angels knew. What they did not know, what even the cherubim who guarded the eastern gate could not perceive, was that Eliakim had been watching her for 7 years. Not from lust, for the seraphim are creatures of pure fire and know nothing of the body's hungers. He watched her because her prayers were the only ones that made the altar flame flicker in a rhythm different from the prescribed liturgy. She prayed with her whole life, bleeding through the words, and the holiness of the Most High stirred when she spoke. That stirring was forbidden for a seraph to feel, but Eliakim felt it anyway. He told himself it was intercession. He told himself he was merely joining his own fire to her petitions, as the law of heaven permitted any angel to do for a soul under trial. But the law of heaven also said that a seraph's attention must never fix on a single mortal, for the fire that purifies can also consume. Eliakim did not understand that he was already burning. He only knew that when Miriam brought her oldest son to the temple priests for the redemption ceremony, the smell of the 5 shekels of silver in the offering basket was sweeter to him than the smoke of the morning sacrifice. The elders of the heavenly court began to notice. The 24 elders who sit before the throne see everything, and they saw that one of the seraphim had developed a shadow where no shadow belonged. A seraph is made of light and fire, with nothing hidden, nothing opaque. But Eliakim had begun to hold something back. When he sang the Trisagion, the thrice holy hymn that never ceases before the throne, his voice was perfect, his pitch exact, but the elders heard a silence within the sound. A space where his devotion should have been, where a thought of Miriam lived instead. This is the part most people miss. The fall of Lucifer was pride, a rebellion of the will, but the fall of a seraph is different. A seraph does not rebel against God. A seraphim merely stops looking at God and looks at something else. The gaze shifts and the fire begins to cool. The 6 wings that once burned with the direct heat of the divine presence begin to grow cold at the tips. The face, which is always covered in the presence of the Most High, begins to ache for the sight of something else. In Eliakim's case, that something else was the curve of Miriam's neck as she bent her head in prayer. She had no way of knowing that an angel was falling because of her. No one had ever taught her that a mortal soul could be so beautiful that it would draw a seraph out of orbit. She was a widow by the time Eliakim's attention had become fixation. Her husband had died in a building accident crushed by a falling stone from the new aqueduct that Herod's sons were building. The rabbis said the accident was divine judgment for some hidden sin, but Eliakim knew the truth. The man had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and mortality had claimed him the way mortality claims everyone. But Miriam did not know that. She carried the guilt of her husband's death like a stone in her chest, and every prayer she prayed was an attempt to lift it. Now watch what happens. Eliakim made a decision that no seraph had ever made intentionally in the history of the created order. He decided to intervene directly in Miriam's life, not through the ordinary channels of angelic ministry, but as a visible presence. The lore of the seraphim was clear on this point. They could appear to prophets, as they had appeared to Isaiah, but only on explicit command from the throne. Eliakim had no command. He had only the unbearable pressure of his own love, which he now called compassion, to justify what he was about to do. He appeared to her in the temple courtyard at twilight, when the evening sacrifice was being offered, and the smoke of the altar mixed with the fading light. He did not appear in his full glory, for that would have killed her instantly. He appeared as a man, tall and radiant, with eyes that held a fire she could not look away from. The priests saw him and thought he was a visitor from Babylon, for his robes were unlike any they had seen. But Miriam knew immediately that he was not a man. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmony of the thrice holy hymn beneath the words, and the hair on her arms stood up. Eliakim made himself visible, broke the law of the seraphim, and stood before a grieving woman in the twilight.
That single choice changed everything, and it raises a question you might already feel stirring. What would you trade for the chance to undo someone else's pain? If this kind of hidden cost stirs something in you, subscribe so you don't miss what happens when heaven's order bends for love.
And in the comments, tell me, did you sense his love was already slipping toward something forbidden the moment she recognized his voice? He told her that her husband was in the hands of the Most High and that his death was not her fault. He told her that the guilt she carried was a lie from the accuser. He told her that she was loved with a love that had no beginning and no end. And when he said these things, the stone in her chest cracked and she began to weep. The weeping of a soul being set free is the most beautiful sound in all of creation. And Eliakim heard it and knew that he could never go back to the throne. He had seen her face, uncovered, and his heart was no longer his own. But here is what the scrolls do not tell you. The seraphim are not merely angels of worship. They are also the guardians of the altar, and the altar is where covenants are made and broken. Every covenant ever cut between God and humanity has a corresponding record in the fire of that altar. Abraham's covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant, all of them are written in flames that only the seraphim can read. And when a seraph falls, the covenant records that he guarded begin to burn differently. The fire does not go out, but it changes color. It shifts from gold to a pale, sickly green that smells of sulfur and regret. Eliakim knew this. He knew that his presence in Miriam's life was already affecting the altar fire. He knew that the elders had noticed, but he also knew that he could not stop. The love he felt was not the gentle, ordered love of heaven. It was a desperate, clinging love, the love of a creature who has tasted something finite and found it more intoxicating than the infinite. The theologians call this disordered love, but Eliakim did not care what the theologians called it. He only cared that Miriam was praying again with hope instead of despair, and that the sound of her restored faith was worth every consequence he knew was coming. The first consequence arrived 7 days later. A demon came to the temple. Not through the gate, for no unclean spirit can enter the sanctuary precincts, but to the edge of the court of the Gentiles, where it stood and watched Eliakim with eyes that had been burning since the first rebellion. The demon did not speak. It simply waited. And in that waiting, Eliakim understood something terrible. The demon was not there for Miriam. The demon was there for him. The underworld had sensed a fracture in the heavenly order, and it had sent an agent to observe the break. You have never felt fear, like the fear of an angel who knows he is being watched by hell. The security of heaven, the absolute certainty of the divine protection that every angel takes for granted, begins to erode. Eliakim felt the first cold draft against his wings, and he realized that somewhere deep in his being, the fire was beginning to go out. Not all at once, just a flicker. But a flicker in a seraph is a cataclysm in the spiritual realm. The moment a seraph's fire dims, every eye in heaven and hell turns to see why. Miriam saw nothing of this. She went home that night and slept peacefully for the first time in years. She did not know that her peace had been purchased with the stability of a celestial being. She did not know that the visitor in the temple courtyard had begun a process that would end either in his destruction or in a reordering of reality itself. And she certainly did not know that the demon standing at the edge of the court had already begun to make its report to the prince of the power of the air, who was very interested in the news that a seraph had developed a preference. Now the elders could no longer remain silent. The 24 elders who sit on thrones around the throne of God convened an inquiry. This is recorded nowhere in Scripture, for Scripture records only what happens on earth. But the book of Enoch, which the Ethiopian church preserves as canonical, hints at such inquiries. It speaks of angels who were examined before the Most High for their transgressions, and of the watchers who fell because they looked upon the daughters of men. Eliakim was about to join that company, but his fall would be different from the watchers. The watchers were sent to earth as guardians and abused their office. Eliakim had no office on earth. He belonged in the throne room, and he was leaving it by his own choice. The lead elder was a being named Sariel, whose name means the Prince of God. Sariel had been a witness to every covenant ever made, from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses. He had seen angels fall before, but he had never seen a seraph fall, because seraphim do not fall. They are the closest to the fire, the most refined, the most pure. When Sariel looked at Eliakim, he saw not a rebellious angel, but a feverish one. The problem was not disobedience. The problem was love, and love cannot be commanded. It can only be offered or withheld. Sariel asked Eliakim 3 questions. The first one was this: do you know what you're doing? And Eliakim answered yes. The second question was this: do you know what it will cost? And Eliakim answered yes. The third question was this: do you love her more than you love the fire? And Eliakim could not answer, because the truth was that he did not know whether he loved Miriam more than the fire. He only knew that the fire had become painful, and that looking at Miriam had become necessary. Those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the difference between an angel and a ghost. The elders gave Eliakim 24 hours to reconsider. They told him that the seal of his seraphic office could be removed, that his wings could be taken, that his name could be erased from the book of the living servants. They told him that Miriam would not remember him, that the moment he chose her openly, heaven would remove every trace of his intervention from her memory, leaving her with the peace he had given her, but no recollection of the price. The love would survive, but the lover would vanish. She would feel grateful, but not know to whom. She would sense a presence, but never see a face. Eliakim heard the terms and felt the cold draft grow stronger. The demon was still waiting at the edge of the court, and now there were 2 more with it. 3 demons, watching, waiting, recording every word of the inquiry. The underworld was building a file on Eliakim, a dossier of his descent, and it would be used against him if he fell. Because when a seraph falls, he does not become a demon. He becomes something worse. He becomes food for demons. A fallen seraph is not an agent of evil. A fallen seraph is a broken vessel, a flame without fuel, a presence that the dark powers can feed on for eternity. The cold draft is getting stronger, and the demons are already building their file. If you want to see whether Eliakim moves toward the flame or toward the woman, subscribe, because this story is not forgiving, and what comes next will test everything you thought you knew about the cost of love. Before the next scene begins, tell me in the comments, what price have you seen someone pay for a love that heaven itself warned against? Miriam woke the next morning with a strange lightness in her chest. She could not explain it. The grief for her husband was still there, but it had been moved aside, like a stone rolled away from a tomb. She felt as though someone had been with her in the night, someone who had held her while she slept. But she lived alone and the door was locked. She went to the market and bought bread and oil, and the merchant noticed that she was smiling. She had not smiled in 2 years. The merchant said nothing, but he remembered it, and he told his wife. And within a week, the whole neighborhood knew that the widow Miriam had somehow recovered. No one knew how, no one asked. But heaven knew, and hell knew, and in the temple, the altar fire had turned from gold to the color of dying embers. The priests noticed that the flame in the holy place seemed weaker than usual. They checked the fuel, checked the wick, checked the oil. Everything was as it should be. But the flame was not as it should be, and they could not explain it. They simply offered the morning sacrifice and went about their duties, troubled but silent. The high priest, a man named Eleazar who had served for 20 years, saw the flame and felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He knew, in the way that the high priest knows, that something was wrong in the unseen world. Eliakim made his choice at midnight, not dramatically, not with a declaration. He simply folded his 6 wings, walked out of the sanctuary of the Seraphim, and descended to the court of women, where Miriam had knelt every day for the past week to pray. He did not appear in visible form this time. He stood behind her, invisible, and laid his hand on her shoulder. The touch of a seraph is the touch of fire, but he had cooled himself enough that she only felt a warmth, a gentle pressure that made her bow her head and weep again. She said a prayer that Eliakim would never forget. She prayed that whoever had visited her in the temple courtyard would be blessed, that whoever had helped her carry her grief would be rewarded, that whoever had shown her love when she felt unlovable would find love in return. In that moment, Eliakim knew he could not go back, not because he was trapped by his choice, but because he had heard her pray for him. She did not know his name. She did not know he was an angel, but she had prayed for his blessing, and the Most High, who hears every prayer, heard that one and looked at Eliakim. And the look of the Most High was not anger, it was grief. The grief of a creator who watches a beloved creature choose a lesser good and call it the greatest. The grief of a father who sees his child walk toward a cliff while smiling at a flower. The demon at the gate smiled, and the file on Eliakim was stamped with a single word: seal. Now you need to understand something about the nature of a seraph seal. Every seraph carries a seal, a mark of office that is both a permission and a protection. The seal allows the seraph to approach the throne, to handle the living coal from the altar, to touch the very presence of the Most High without being consumed. When a seraph loses his seal, he cannot approach the altar. He cannot touch the coal. He cannot stand in the presence, and without that presence, the fire inside him will eventually go out. Not because God withdraws it, but because the seraph has withdrawn himself from the source. Eliakim knew that the elders would demand his seal within the week. He had 24 hours to return to the throne and repent, and he had used those hours to stand behind a widow in the court of women and listen to her pray for him. The elders were not surprised. They had seen this resolve before, in the Watchers, in the sons of God, who looked upon the daughters of men. They had seen the stubbornness of love that refuses to be ordered, and they knew that no argument could touch it. Love of that kind is a fire that burns through reason, through duty, through covenant, through everything except itself. The next morning, Eliakim appeared before the throne for the last time as a seraph. He did not sing the Trisagion. He did not cover his face with his wings. He stood with his face uncovered, looking directly at the light that would have destroyed him if he had still been a seraph. But he was no longer a seraph. He was something in between, a creature who had seen the infinite and chosen the finite. A flame that had begun to prefer the warmth of a mortal body to the fire of the eternal. And the light that would have annihilated him if he had approached in defiance now simply passed through him, because he was no longer dense enough to block it. The elders removed his seal. Sariel performed the ceremony, and it took only a moment. The seal was not a physical object. It was a name, written in the language of the throne. And when Sariel spoke the words of removal, the name began to fade from Eliakim's being. He could feel it, leaving, like a memory being erased, like a color draining from a painting. In the place where the seal had been, there was now a vacancy, a hole, a space that would fill with something else if he did not return quickly to the fire. He did not return. He went to the court of women, and he knelt beside Miriam, and he put his head in his hands. She could not see him, but she felt his presence. She felt the weight of his grief, and without knowing why, she began to weep again. The two of them knelt together in the morning light, the widow and the fallen seraph, united by a love that neither of them fully understood. And the altar fire in the holy place dimmed further, and the high priest Eleazar sent word to the elders of Israel that something was wrong in the temple. Now here is where the story takes a turn that most people never expect. The demons of the underworld believed that Eliakim was theirs. They believed that a fallen seraph, a creature of the highest order of angels, would become a trophy, a feast, a declaration of victory over heaven itself. They had prepared a place for him in the deepest pit, a prison of cold fire where his fading warmth would be stretched across eternity. They had prepared chains made of his own memories, binding him to every moment of grace he had abandoned. They had prepared a silence darker than any silence ever experienced by any creature, a silence that would replace the thrice holy hymn he had sung since before the world began. But the demons had made a mistake. They had assumed that Eliakim's love for Miriam was the same as their own hatred of God. It was not. His love was disordered, yes. It was misdirected, yes. It was costing him everything, yes. But it was still love. And love, even disordered love, has a quality that hatred cannot counterfeit. Love leaves a trace, a residue, a signature that belongs to the Most High because the Most High is love, And any love, no matter how broken, retains something of the original source. The demon at the gate realized this too late. When the moment came for Eliakim to cross the boundary out of the temple precincts, when he finally rose from his knees beside Miriam and walked toward the outer court, the demon expected to see a broken, empty creature shuffling into darkness. Instead, it saw a being who still glowed. The glow was not the pure gold of a seraph. It was a pale blue, the color of grief, the color of a love that knows it cannot survive and chooses to love anyway. And that pale blue light was not something the demon could feed on. It was not something the underworld could digest. The demon recoiled, and in that recoil, Eliakim understood something that the elders had not told him. The seal could be removed, but the love could not. The office could be taken, but the choice could not. He had chosen Miriam freely, with full knowledge of the cost, and in that free choice, he had planted something in the heart of the Most High that would not be easily erased. The Most High does not forget the prayers of his creatures, even the fallen ones, and Miriam had prayed for Eliakim's blessing. That prayer was now woven into the fabric of his soul, a thread of light in the growing darkness. But the cost was still real. The wings that had carried him through the heavens began to fade. The 4 wings that had covered his face and feet dissolved first, leaving only the 2 wings of flight. Then those 2 wings began to lose their feathers one by one, each feather falling to the ground and turning to ash before it touched the stone. Eliakim felt every feather fall. He felt the wind that had been his element for millennia turn against him, making every step heavier than the last. He felt the fire that had sustained him begin to condense into something smaller, something that fitted inside his chest like a coal that refused to go out. You have just witnessed the moment when a guardian's wings fall one by one, and the only thing that remains is a prayer woven into the fabric of his soul by a woman who dared to love him anyway. That thread of light in the growing darkness is the kind of truth that demands we stay awake, that we do not look away from the cost of covenant. Subscribe to walk with us through the rest of this sacred transaction, because the fire that refuses to go out still has something to say. And tell me in the comments, when you saw that pale blue light, what word rose in your chest? Hope, grief, or something else you have no name for yet? Miriam lifted her head. She did not see the wings falling. She did not see the demon recoiling. But she saw a man standing at the gate of the court of women. A man she had never seen before, whose face was streaked with tears and whose eyes held a fire she recognized.
Good morning.
She recognized him because she had seen those eyes in her dreams the night before. She had felt his hand on her shoulder. She had heard his voice saying her name in the rhythm of a hymn she had never learned. She rose to her feet and walked toward him, not knowing why, not understanding what she was doing. He did not speak. The Seraphim speak in the language of the throne, and that language cannot be translated into human words without breaking something. But he looked at her, and she understood. She understood that he had given up something for her. She understood that he was now as mortal as she was, or close to it, and that he had nowhere to go. She reached out her hand, and he took it, and they left the temple together, amid the staring eyes of priests who recognized that something impossible had happened, but could not name it. The high priest Eleazar came out of the holy place and saw the 2 of them walking away. He saw the fading wings, the ash scattered on the stones, the pale blue glow that still clung to the man's shoulders. He understood immediately what had happened. He had read the scrolls. He had studied the visions of Isaiah. He knew that a seraph had come to the temple and had chosen not to leave with heaven's permission. He fell to his knees and prayed, not for the seraph, but for the people of Israel, because he knew that when a guardian of the altar falls, the altar itself is left vulnerable. And he was right. That night, the altar fire in the temple went out for the first time since the dedication of Solomon's temple 400 years earlier. The priests struggled to relight it, but the flame would not catch. The wood was dry, the oil was pure, the wick was clean, but the flame would not catch. Because the fire of the altar is not merely physical fire, it is the fire of the covenant, and the covenant had been breached. Not by Israel, but by an angel, and the breach was wide enough that the fire could not sustain itself. Do you see now what one choice can do? One look, one preference, one moment of disordered love, and the altar of the living God goes dark.
The Temple of Jerusalem, the center of the universe in Jewish cosmology, lost its flame because a seraph looked at a widow and could not look away. This is not a metaphor. This is the weight of the covenant. Every creature in heaven and earth is connected by the threads of that covenant, and when one thread snaps, the entire fabric trembles. Miriam did not know any of this. She only knew that the stranger who took her hand had eyes that held the entire history of the world, and that he needed a place to rest. She brought him to her home, a small stone house on the edge of the city, and she gave him water and bread. He ate like a man who had never tasted food, which was true. He drank like a man who had never known thirst, which was also true. And when he finished, he looked at her and smiled, and in that smile, she saw the fire that had been in the temple altar for 400 years. She did not understand that she was looking at the flame that had gone out. She only knew that she wanted to stay in the light of that smile forever. The elders of heaven watched. Sariel, the Prince of God, stood at the edge of the heavenly court and saw Miriam offering bread to Eliakim in a small stone house. He saw the pale blue glow that surrounded them both, the glow of a love that refused to be extinguished, even when every reason for it had been removed. And Sariel did something that surprised even the other elders. He smiled, not because the situation was good, but because in that moment he saw something he had not expected to see. He saw the image of the Most High reflected in the face of a fallen seraph who was being fed by a human hand. The demon at the gate of the temple was still there. It had not crossed into the temple precincts, but it now had permission to wait at the threshold. And it waited, because the file on Eliakim was sealed, but the account was not yet closed. The demon knew that a seraph can live without his wings for a season. He can live without his seal for a season, but he cannot live without the fire forever. And the fire inside Eliakim was dying, not fast, but steadily. The pale blue glow would eventually fade. The love would remain, but the warmth would go. And when the warmth was gone, the demon would have its feast at last. But the demon did not know about Miriam's prayer, and it did not know that the Most High had written that prayer in the book of life, right next to the name of Eliakim, which was now unwritten.